Ruth was in a deep, peaceful sleep in the dark, quiet room with her fiancé, James. It was their first night together in his home, a moment she had dreamed of for weeks. But in the quietness of the night, something evil was stirring. The air in the room grew colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed to move. Suddenly, a massive, terrifying figure appeared out of the darkness. The creature was horrifying to behold, towering taller than any man, with skin that looked cracked and rough. Its eyes glowed like burning coals, and its mouth twisted into a cruel grin, exposing rows of jagged teeth. It had very long, dark pubic hair that reached down to its legs, nearly touching the floor. Between its legs was a ManHood so huge and monstrous it seemed unreal. Ruth's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling as though she sensed its presence, even in her sleep. The creature crept toward her bed, its heavy footsteps making no sound. Its shadow covered her small body. It stood over her for a moment before getting onto the bed. She felt it immediately, a weight pressing down on her, something invading her dreams and dragging her into a horrifying half-conscious state. Ruth wanted to scream, to push it away, but her body wouldn't obey. Her arms and legs were frozen, her voice silenced as though an invisible hand had gripped her throat. The creature began to make love to her, its touch overwhelming. Somewhere deep inside, Ruth knew this was wrong. She knew she should resist, but there was a part of her, a dark forbidden part, that enjoyed the sensation. It was a pleasure like nothing she had ever known, but it came with a suffocating, unnatural power that terrified her. She moaned, even though tears streamed down her cheeks as she battled the war inside her mind, wanting to escape but feeling utterly trapped. Suddenly, Ruth's eyes snapped open, and she let out a terrifying scream that echoed through the room. James startled awake, jumping out of bed in panic, his heart racing. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice shaking. He looked at Ruth, who was sitting upright, her body trembling, her face drenched in sweat, her eyes darting around the room, wide with fear. "He was here," she gasped, clutching the bed sheet to her chest. "Who? What are you talking about?" James asked, confusion and concern etched on his face. Ruth's voice was barely above a whisper. "The monster. He was here." James frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What monster, Ruth? What are you talking about?" She pointed toward the shadows in the corner of the room, her hands shaking violently. "He came to me, in my dreams." Her voice trailed off as her gaze fell to the bed. James followed her eyes, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Ruth's panties were pulled down to her knees, and the sheets beneath her were soaked. The dampness wasn't just sweat, it was something else entirely. James's heart pounded in his chest as dread crept over him. "What is this?" he stammered, stepping away from the bed. Ruth tried to explain, her words stumbling out in a frantic rush. "It's not what you think. He comes to me in my dreams. I don't know how to stop him. I've tried, James. I've tried, but I can't." James cut her off, his voice trembling with both fear and anger. "You mean to tell me some monster is doing this to you, and you can't stop it?" Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, James, I didn't choose this. I don't want this. I can't do this." James interrupted, running his hands through his hair. "I can't be with someone who's haunted by something like this. This is too much. You need help, Ruth, but I can't help you." Ruth's heart shattered. "No, James, please don't leave me. We can figure this out together. I'll find a way to stop him. Please, just don't leave me." But James shook his head, his face pale, his voice firm. I can't compete with that. I'm sorry, Ruth. You need to go." Ruth sobbed as she gathered her belongings. She turned back to James one last time, hoping he would change his mind, but he wouldn't even look at her. As she stepped out into the cold night air, Ruth felt an overwhelming wave of despair. The streets were empty, silent except for the sound of her own footsteps. She clutched her bag tightly, her mind racing. I have to stop him, she whispered to herself. I can't let him control my life anymore. I don't care how much I enjoy it. I need my freedom. But deep down, she knew the monster wasn't just in her dreams, it was inside her, a dark presence she had yet to fully understand. The thought sent chills down her spine as she walked into the darkness, determined to fight back, but unsure if she could ever win. Ruth rushed home, her face streaked with tears, her heart heavy with pain. She burst through the door and ran straight to her grandmother, collapsing at her feet. Grandma, it's happened again, she cried, her voice shaking, tears pouring down her cheeks. Her grandmother, an elderly woman with kind yet tired eyes, sighed deeply and pulled Ruth close, gently stroking her hair. Oh, my child, she whispered, I told you no man can marry you. It's not your fault, Ruth. This curse is older than you, older than any of us. Ruth looked up, her tear-filled eyes begging for answers. Why, Grandma? Why does this keep happening to me? Her grandmother's face grew somber as she prepared to reveal a truth she had kept hidden for years. It started long before you were born, Ruth, she began, her voice trembling. Your parents, they were desperate for a child. For 13 years of marriage, they prayed, they cried, but no baby came. People mocked them, Ruth. They called them cursed. Your mother couldn't bear the shame anymore. Ruth listened intently, her sobs quieting as the weight of her grandmother's words hung in the air. One day, her grandmother continued, your mother's friend told her about the goddess of the river, a powerful being who could grant her a child. Desperate and broken, your mother went to her. The goddess agreed to help, but there was a terrible price to pay. Ruth's heart pounded. What price, Grandma? Her grandmother hesitated, tears glistening in her own eyes. The goddess told your mother she could have a child, but she would have to give one of her children back as a sacrifice. Ruth, your mother agreed. She was so desperate, she didn't think of the future, of what it would mean for you. When you were born, you were promised to the goddess. You don't belong to this world, my child. You belong to the gods. Ruth's hands trembled as she bowed her head, tears streaming down her face like a waterfall. The pain of betrayal, the weight of the curse, it was too much to bear. Her voice was barely a whisper as she said, why me, Grandma? Why did she choose me? Her grandmother had no answers, only sorrow. Ruth stood abruptly, her fist clenched, her face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Ruth, where are you going? Her grandmother called, panic in her voice, but Ruth didn't stop. She stormed out of the house, her tears blurring her vision. She walked with purpose, her steps heavy and determined, until she reached the graveyard. Her mother's grave lay there, silent and unyielding. Ruth knelt down in front of the grave, her body trembling with rage and sorrow. Why, Mother, she cried out, her voice breaking. Why me? Why did you do this to me? She placed her hands on the cold stone, her tears falling onto the ground below. Was I not enough for you to own path, to fight for her freedom without relying on others or sacrificing her dignity? Ruth's mind was consumed by a fierce resolve to sever the bond that had trapped her for so long. She could no longer let herself be ruled by fear, nor could she continue living with the memories of her mother's betrayal. She needed to take control of her life, no matter the cost. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Ruth spent her time researching, seeking answers on how to break the curse, finding solace in the quiet moments when she could simply breathe without the haunting presence of the monster that stalked her dreams. She avoided the temptation to give in, and though the weight of her curse still lingered, she began to feel a quiet strength building within her. One evening, As she sat at her small kitchen table, Ruth felt a strange pull, as if the universe were urging her to take the final step. She knew what she had to do. She had to face the spirit husband once and for all. This time, she wouldn't run. Ruth decided she would confront him head-on and demand to be free. She had no more room for doubt, only the unyielding desire to take back her life. Her decision was made, and Ruth spent the following days preparing herself mentally for the confrontation. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a fighting chance. The curse was not her destiny, it was something she could overcome. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ruth gathered her courage, determined to break free from the chains of her past. She would fight to reclaim her life, no matter how dark or terrifying the battle might become. Ruth's frustration bubbled over as she turned to face Larry. "What's the point, Larry? It's not you, it's me. I'm broken. I don't know how to be with you the way a wife should be," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Larry's heart sank as he listened to her words. He had noticed the distance between them, the growing coldness, but hearing it out loud was like a punch to the gut. "Ruth, please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't want to pressure you, but I want to understand. I want to help you heal. I'm here for you, always." Ruth closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that had threatened to fall. "It's just that I feel like I've lost a part of myself," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Even though I'm free from the spirit's hold, I still feel empty. Like something inside of me is missing, and I don't know how to feel it." Larry gently took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles as he spoke softly. "We can walk through this together, Ruth. I love you. We'll find a way, okay?" Ruth looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the same love she once felt for him, but the lingering shadows of her past seemed to hold her captive. It wasn't just the spiritual bond that haunted her anymore, it was the emotional scars, the trauma that she hadn't fully healed from. "I don't know if I can," Ruth whispered, a tremor in her voice. Larry squeezed her hand, unwavering. "You don't have to know right now. We'll take it one step at a time. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. I'm not going anywhere." Ruth's chest tightened as she looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and love that shone through despite everything. She wasn't sure if she could ever fully overcome her past, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the flicker of hope. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's try. Together." And so, they began the long, difficult journey of rebuilding their relationship, with Larry offering patience and love, and Ruth learning to trust him again. It wasn't easy, and there were many moments of doubt, but through their struggles, they slowly began to heal. Ruth discovered that the love she had longed for, real love, wasn't something to be afraid of. And with Larry by her side, she found the courage to face her past and embrace the future they would build together. As the years passed, their bond grew stronger, and although Ruth never completely shook the shadows of her past, she found peace in the light of the love she had with Larry, a love that had freed her in ways the spirits never could. Larry sat there, unable to move, as Ruth's words echoed in his mind. The woman he loved, the woman he had sacrificed so much for, had just shattered his heart in a single moment. The silence between them was deafening. He could feel the weight of her words crushing him, but he couldn't find the strength to respond. He had tried everything. He had sacrificed his manhood for her, giving up everything he had to ensure her freedom, and yet none of it had been enough. His love, his devotion, all seemed to count for nothing. Ruth stood by the window, her back turned to him, lost in her own thoughts. She hadn't wanted to say those things, but in that moment, the years of frustration and pain had poured out of her. She had tried so hard to love him, to build a life with him, but every touch, every attempt at intimacy felt wrong, as if something inside of her was broken beyond repair. I'm sorry, Larry's voice cracked, finally breaking the silence. I love you, Ruth. I always have. I don't know what happened. I thought we could fix this. Ruth turned around slowly, her face unreadable. We can't fix it, Larry. I can't fix myself. Every time you try, it just feels like I'm still bound to the past. I'm still trapped in the memories of what happened to me. I can't move forward, not with you, not with anyone. Larry's heart clenched at her words, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. He had seen the distance growing between them over the years, but he hadn't known how deep it ran. I don't know what to do anymore, Ruth whispered, her voice cracking. I can't be the woman you want me to be. I'm not her, Larry. I don't even know who I am anymore. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly, unwilling to let him see her break. Larry stood up, his legs trembling, and walked toward her, reaching for her hand. You don't have to be perfect for me, Ruth. You never did. I just need you. I need you to try. Ruth pulled her hand away gently, shaking her head. I can't. I've tried, and I'm failing you. And I don't want to drag you down with me. Larry's throat tightened as he fought to hold back the tears. I'm not going anywhere, Ruth. I love you. And if you're broken, I'll help you fix yourself. But I can't do that if you won't even let me try. For a moment, Ruth stood still, looking at him as if seeing him for the first time. Her heart ached for him, for the love he offered so freely, yet all she felt was emptiness inside. I don't know how to love you the way you want me to, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Larry took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I don't need you to love me the way I want you to. I need you to love me the way you can. And if that means taking it one step at a time, then we'll do that. Together. But Ruth shook her head again, her face contorted with pain. I'm not ready. I'm not sure I ever will be. The weight of her words crushed him, but Larry refused to let go. He knew this wasn't just about their marriage, it was about Ruth's healing, her ability to move beyond the chains of her past. But he also knew he couldn't force her to do that, not if she wasn't ready. I'll wait, Larry said quietly, though his voice was filled with uncertainty. I'll wait as long as it takes. But I can't stay in this limbo, Ruth. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. Ruth looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with tears, and walked toward the door. I need space, Larry. I need time to figure this out. I don't know if I can fix this, or if I ever will. But I can't keep hurting you. Larry stood in the middle of their bedroom, a man broken and unsure of what came next. He had given everything he had, but love, it seemed, wasn't always enough. As Ruth walked away, he wondered if their fragile thread of love would ever be strong enough to survive the wounds of the past, or if it would unravel forever. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment and subscribe.